So dot connecting, I think we sort of made reference to this as we've moved through. We often kind of jump into interviews assuming that the candidate has picked up all of those hints that we've put out in the posting and they know exactly what the role is and how we're thinking about it. But everybody's interpretation is different. So it's not usually the case that you show up with an interview and it's perfectly aligned to what you're looking at, the candidate's perfectly aligned, and they kind of, it's again, that checklist rubric. They meet all of those pieces. There's always a little bit of difference in how the committee and the organization and the candidate are actually thinking about the role. So one of the things that Tim and I find really useful is to sort of set those assumptions aside and spend a little bit of time at the upfront of that first interview, connecting the dots to iron that out. So it also allows candidates to tell a story and bring their story in. So it's what did you notice about this role? What drew your attention? How would you connect kind of your experience, your kind of journey to what you're reading in this job description? And, is there alignment? Where might there be confusion? Where might there be, points that you want to, that are more important than maybe what the candidate picked up just based on the way that it was written or read or interpreted or it made sense of? And so how do you sort of just get that little bit of alignment? This next piece around the concepts of the role. So recruitment tends to have this like strange longstanding assumption that past experience is the best predictor of future job success. And so search processes tend to use this as a basis for assessing candidates, right? In a really traditional Western management approach, questions tend to drill into how our previous experience is similar to or prepared us for this role. Do we have the right education from the right schools? Have we managed a similar size team or budget? Have we worked in a similar structure, sector, size of organization? Do we have direct experience doing the kinds of things the job posting said this role was responsible for? And oftentimes some of the questions that traditionally are used to kind of check this, they are actually done for the purpose of excluding candidates who haven't had that very similar job experience in the past, or that similar job role title even in the past. And so this is why kind of tell me about a time when you have can be a little bit problematic as scenarios. So it might be one of those moments where we pause and say, how do we design here for inclusion instead? And so one of the big pieces of this is understanding that context really matters. And so just because something, somebody's done something once doesn't mean it can be replicable and successful in your environment. There's actually like a Harvard Business School study, I think, that found that people tend to rate success. I'm just reading this little quote here. People tend to rate success achieved in relatively benign conditions far higher than they might moderate success in far more testing conditions. And so it's probable that recruiters are discounting candidates who could be great while promoting candidates who might have, significant flaws because their project was deemed to be successful, even though the context might be completely different. So that's where we find kind of this designing, this usefulness of designing the questions around the KSAs, because it helps to open up that conversation and really learn about the narrative of those really successful or, those efforts that people have had in similar maybe contexts or situations. So it helps assess, first of all, the quality over the quantity. So, one of those things around how many years of experience, well, in a shorter period of time, what was the quality of work? What was the quality of that learning that you're bringing forward there? It might not be the same. It might not be directly connected to the number of years. But there's also this other benefit that it plants seeds with the candidates. So as the candidate moves through your process, you're highlighting for them what knowledge, skills, and abilities are required. And then that allows them to bring those forward in their responses as they move forward. They remember the questions from interview one and the way that they were phrased, and they sort of start to anticipate that those are the things they're going to bring forward. At least that's what we've learned. And then finally, different ways to plant seeds with the candidates. So we can share in advance to test and see if they're picking up and, how they're picking up what we're putting down. So in our Opera Philadelphia case, what we did was, in one case, when we asked to mention the writing sample as part of an actual scenario that they might have to deal with in the organization. But another thing we did was we recorded a conversation between two members of the hiring committee who were senior leadership. This was a senior leadership position. And we asked them to just talk for 10 minutes about a real issue that they're encountering. And so it's something that, we framed it as this got brought up in a leadership meeting. Here's a part of the conversation. Assume you were in this role and you missed this meeting, but you need to follow. That was something that was really important that you need to follow up on. And so you're actually giving them a chance to witness a real conversation between real people about a real issue in your organization. And you can test, what are they picking up from that, and what made them curious, and how might they kind of structure a space that they can step into and carry that conversation forward in the organization. What recommendations, what flags do they have, those kinds of things. So there may be ways to bring content or information in as pre-work or as pre-reading, pre-prep, that will allow you to kind of test different aspects of their knowledge, skills, and abilities in the actual interview time.
There's a fascinating study when you think about this, the classic, investment disclaimer, past performance is not indicative of future returns or whatever it is. There's this really great study that they followed investment bankers, like highly compensated investment bankers. And I'm sure a number of you know about this one, but it's like, they followed them from the role that they sort of made, quote unquote, made their name with, to their next role. And they wanted to track to see how successful people were when they sort of pivoted into these roles where they made even more money than they did in their prior role. And they found that for the most part, the people were only successful if they took their team with them. So when we think about you might have just tell me about a time when you did that. Yeah, but right, you can tell me about a time, but I'm not bringing the other 3 people with you that you had on your team. So this is one of those things where I find scenarios to be really helpful. And to the question Winter had around crafting questions, there are countless blog posts and books and how to hire like Google and all these questions out there. But a lot of times, sometimes they're helpful, but if you only get 5 to 7, you have to figure out how they directly relate to the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so I always I really love scenarios that are bespoke to the role. And in particular, but scenarios that are bespoke to the role that have no right, quote unquote, right answer. So, and the beauty about this is they already exist, unless this is a brand new role in your organization. Like if you're hiring a project manager to replace a project manager who just left, you have probably countless scenarios that this project manager experienced in the job that you can just sort of tweak and then offer them throughout the process. So the candidates are responding to the real tasks and decisions that they would have to demonstrate in the role, rather than if you were shrunk to the size of a nickel and placed at the bottom of a blender and the blender was turned on, how would you get out? That's not all, again, useful. It's a cool question, like a cocktail party, but for this role, project manager, that's not helpful. And so I find it's like a limitless pool of questions too. You can end with more questions you can ever get to. And then you have to sit and say, in interview 1, what do we need to learn? And from this batch of scenarios, what do we think will give us the best data to understand how someone in this role would appreciate that? And as a caveat, I find if everyone answers the scenario in the same way, I've crafted a bad scenario. There's a pretty big back door if everyone tell me how do you track and prioritize projects or something, and I'm a list person. If everyone says they're a list person, it's I've done a bad job at crafting that. So this is where I think as you move through different interviews, if you're hiring different roles, maybe you tweak scenarios to test them out, and then so you have your solid ones like this. We know how this operates, or I love the concept of concurrent validity, by sort of crafting a scenario and asking someone who might be in the role right now how they would answer it, as another test to see does this work? Is this a solid enough scenario, or does everyone answer the same way, or am I missing bits of the scenario that the context that people would need to answer it well? Katrina, I think since we're recording tomorrow, let's record the rubric as a bonus.
Sure.
And then we can offer that up there because looking at time, want to really sort of expand on the rubric work. So, so I guess this is something to say. There'll be another bonus video up tomorrow.
Mhm.
The sketching of scripts have found really useful, especially if you don't have the same people in the room for every interview. And as an HR person who gets concerned about people who might be freelancing interviews and questions and scenarios and getting into those areas where like you shouldn't ask that question in an interview. This is really helpful if I'm not in the room to be like, we've all agreed, this is the scenario, it has people's names on it, this is exactly what you say, practice it enough times so it comes off naturally. But then everyone who's in the process knows exactly what's being asked. And the bonus here is then you can distribute these to the entire team. And then they know what every candidate had to go through in the job interview. And so there's a way to build trust and with that transparency throughout the organization. Also, you probably have to change up your scenarios the next time because they'll probably start circulating in your community. So if you're hiring again, just have that in mind. But I found this is a really helpful way to know that this is what we're going to do. This is the timing, especially when it comes to one crucial piece, flipping to the candidate questions. Like we know if it's an hour-long interview at minute 35, if we're not done, we're going to stop because we want the candidate to know, and they know up front that we're going to flip to questions, but the interview is as much for them as it is for us. And that's one way of doing that. Mm-hmm. And then everyone knows like which questions we didn't get through with everyone. And so that maybe you sort of discount the ones if you did get 8 questions answered in one, but only 5 in the other, that let's just compare the questions for the 5. The next slide here, and then we'll sort of pivot. This is really just a quick one. There's a resource that Katrina and I found when we were teaching in a program that I have never found again. This is going to be posted in the resources for module 3. It is the most extensive collection of cognitive bias and decision making I've ever found. It's like 20 pages long.